I generally absolutely love G25, but there is a problem with G25, and I want to show it here. And I want to show you the way I have sort of mitigated that problem. So this comes down to the Fatyanovo people in central Russia. And when you run them on G25, you will see that they are closest to. It's very bizarre. Swedes, Norwegians, Danes. How come they're closer to these Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes than they are to Russians? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Russians have more Yamnaya than Swedes. Yeah, Russians have more steppe EHG, CHG than Swedes. Russians have less farmer than Swedes. So why would these Fatyanovites be closer to Swedes than to Russians? And by the way, it's a tiny edge. It's zero point 0.7 to Swedes, and the Russians would be what Cossack Kuban, Kubansky Kazaki. That would be 0.74. So there's a tiny edge. But still, why are they closer to Swedes than to Russians? And you will notice this pattern with the other Fatyanovites from Ivanovo, from Moscow, from Tver, from Yaroslavl. You will notice the same exact thing with all of these Fatyanovites. Well, the problem is Russians have a lot of, and Slavs in general, have a lot of drift. We went through a population bottleneck where very few of us survived. So these extreme genotypes uh, that are not common in Swedes and our ancestors even became more prevalent because so few of us survived and were able to pass on. Whatever this bottleneck was and whenever it happened, we do not know, but we do know it occurred. And we do know that Slavs have a lot of drift because of it. So it's when you try to model Slavs in G25 with ancient people, when ancestral people, you will get a very high fit, a very bad fit. It's very difficult to model us with ancient ancestral people because we don't resemble them all that much. So how do I find out who these Fatyanovites were really similar to, the ancestors of Slavs or the ancestors of Swedes? I will show you how I did this. So I used G25 to create a my own system of coordinates using ancestral components. Baltic hunter-gatherer, this is one of the components. Global around for a farmer, this is the second component. CHG, the third component. EHG, that's the fourth component. Yimiyachtachta would be the East Eurasian. I had to include this here. And Namazga Tepe, that would be the BMAC. I also had to include this here. And when you look at these populations that I included Ukrainians, Moldovans, Norwegians, Danes, all these people. And you can see this little chart. Well, Vahaduo has a very nice thing where you can, at the very bottom, it says copy table as CSV. You can just copy that chart and you can insert that chart into a different window. And that's what I did. So I made my own calculator, not a G25 calculator, but a what is this? A G6 calculator. This is a calculator with 6 components. And let's see on this calculator with 6 components, which I've shown here, which are Baltic hunter-gatherers, Georgian Caucasus hunter-gatherers, farmers, Eastern hunter-gatherers, Asians, and other Asians. How do these Fatyanovites compare to the other groups? And this is very interesting because now, when you look at Bronze Age Fatyanovites from Ivanovo, from Yaroslavl, excuse me, they're closest to what you might expect them to be closest to. Moksha, Erzia, Russian Kostroma, Russian Tver. That's what they really were closest to. It's just that we underwent a significant genetic drift that made us different from them. But this is what these Fatyanovites were closest to. And by the way, Moksha is the closest ethnicity for me, for my G25. So I am a Fatyanovite. That's what I am, even though because of the drift, I might be more shifted to the somewhere elsewhere. These people were really resembling me in terms of genetics. Let's look at Ivanovo, also Erzia, not Moksha, but Erzia, Kostroma, Moksha, the same groups. Overall, Bronze Age Pasyanovoids closest to Erzia, Moksha. Once again, all the same groups. Moscow, closest to Erzia, Kostroma, Krasnoborsk, all the same groups. From Tver, closest to Erzia, Kostroma, Krasnoborsk, once again, all the same groups. So no, they were not Swedish. The same goes for Sintashta, they were not Swedish. They did not resemble Swedes, rather they resembled Russians without the drift.